The moment someone humiliates you in public reveals far more about their character than yours. The soft melody of a string quartet floated through the grand ballroom while hundreds of crystal lights shimmered above polished marble floors that reflected every expensive dress, tailored tuxedo, and carefully rehearsed smile. Charity galas always looked beautiful in magazines. Standing inside one as a member of the staff felt very different. I balanced a silver tray filled with sparkling water and champagne glasses while moving quietly between elegantly dressed guests who discussed luxury vacations, investment portfolios, and upcoming social events as though the rest of the world did not exist beyond the estate gates. At 28 years old, I had learned that people rarely remembered the woman carrying the tray. Most evenings that was perfectly fine with me. I worked hard because my 6-year-old daughter depended on me, and every extra shift meant another week of groceries, another school book, or another chance to build a better future for both of us. The charity fundraiser occupied one of the city's most exclusive private mansions. Fresh white roses lined the entrance hall. Tall glass doors opened onto a magnificent courtyard where a turquoise swimming pool reflected strings of warm golden lights stretching overhead. Everything appeared flawless. Every detail had been planned with perfection in mind. That illusion lasted until I heard someone call sharply behind me. "You." I turned immediately. Two women dressed in designer evening gowns stood near the edge of the pool, both wearing smiles that somehow felt colder than the winter air outside. One extended an empty champagne flute toward me without making eye contact. "Another refill." "Of course," I answered politely. I accepted the glass, returned moments later with a fresh drink, and offered it carefully with both hands. The taller woman barely glanced at it before frowning dramatically. "This is not cold enough." I apologized softly. "I will gladly replace it." Before I could step away, the second woman laughed just loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Maybe she does not understand simple instructions. Several people looked toward us before quickly pretending not to notice. I lowered my eyes and reached for the glass. "I am sorry. Let me fix that." As I leaned forward, the taller woman suddenly shifted toward me. Her hand moved quickly across the space between us. The sharp sound echoed across the courtyard before I even realized what had happened. My face stung instantly. The silver tray slipped from my hands, crashing against the marble as crystal glasses scattered harmlessly across the ground. The entire courtyard fell silent for one impossible heartbeat. Then whispers replaced the silence. Someone sighed awkwardly. Someone else quietly looked away. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody asked whether I was hurt. The two women simply exchanged satisfied smiles as though embarrassing another human being had become part of the evening's entertainment. My cheek burned, but something inside me refused to let the tears appear. I slowly bent down, gathered the unbroken glasses one by one, and placed them back onto the tray with steady hands. "I apologize," I said quietly, even though I had done nothing wrong. I picked up the last glass, straightened my uniform, and prepared to leave the courtyard with the only thing nobody had managed to take from me: my dignity. Neither woman noticed the figure standing on the private balcony above the ballroom. Hidden behind the warm glow of the second-floor windows, one man had witnessed every second of the scene without interruption. His gray eyes never left mine as I quietly walked away, and unlike everyone else beneath those elegant lights, he had not looked away when it mattered most. I carried the tray through the service hallway without looking back, not because I was ashamed, but because I refused to give anyone the satisfaction of watching me fall apart. The sting across my cheek had already begun to fade. The silence from the people who had witnessed everything hurt far more. Inside the staff room, I quietly placed the remaining glasses onto the counter and reached for a clean towel. Cold water from the sink soothed my skin while I took one slow breath after another, reminding myself that Emma would be waiting at home with another drawing she wanted to show me and another bedtime story she would insist I read twice before she fell asleep. That thought alone gave me enough strength to straighten my shoulders. Mrs. Harper, the catering supervisor, stepped into the room carrying a clipboard. I expected another assignment or perhaps an apology she did not owe me. Instead, she looked at me with genuine concern. "Clara," she said softly, "someone would like to speak with you upstairs." I frowned. Was there a complaint? She shook her head. "No, quite the opposite." Before I could ask another question, two men in dark tailored suits appeared quietly outside the doorway. Neither looked impatient. One simply offered a respectful nod. Please come with us. Every member of the catering staff stopped working long enough to watch me leave. My heart beat faster with every step as we walked through a private corridor hidden behind the ballroom. Thick carpets replaced polished marble. The music from the gala faded until only the quiet crackling of a fireplace remained. One of the men opened a pair of walnut doors leading into a private lounge overlooking the courtyard through floor-to-ceiling windows. From there, the entire pool area lay below like a carefully arranged stage. Standing beside the glass was the same man I had noticed only briefly on the balcony before returning inside. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and perfectly composed. His dark suit fit with effortless precision, and when he turned toward me, the cuff of his white shirt shifted just enough to reveal intricate black tattoos continuing beneath the sleeve. His gray eyes met mine without pity, without curiosity, and without the uncomfortable sympathy I had grown used to receiving after difficult moments. They carried something much quieter. Respect. He picked up a neatly folded navy blazer resting across the back of a chair and walked toward me. You should not have to finish your shift wearing wet clothes, he said calmly, offering it to me. I accepted it almost automatically. Thank you. The fabric was warm from the fire. Please, he continued, motioning toward a chair beside the fireplace. Sit down for a few minutes. I hesitated. I still have work to do. A faint smile crossed his face. The event will survive without you for 10 minutes. I sat carefully while he poured a cup of hot tea and placed it in front of me. Steam curled gently into the quiet room. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he introduced himself. My name is Vincent Romano. The name sounded familiar, though I could not immediately place it. Before I could answer, he looked through the window toward the courtyard below, where the gala continued as though nothing unusual had happened. I witnessed everything, he said quietly, and I wanted you to know that at least one person in this house understood exactly who deserved the apology. For a long moment, I simply held the warm cup of tea between my hands, watching the thin ribbon of steam drift upward while trying to understand why a complete stranger cared more about what had happened than an entire courtyard filled with influential people. Vincent remained standing beside the window overlooking the gala, his attention still fixed on the illuminated pool where the evening continued without interruption. The same two women now laughed comfortably with another group of guests, completely unaware that someone had witnessed every detail of their behavior. Finally, I spoke. Thank you for saying that. He turned toward me. For what? For letting me know I was not invisible. Something softened in his expression. You were never invisible. The words settled quietly inside me. I had spent years believing the best way to survive difficult jobs was to become unnoticed, to finish every task without creating problems, and to return home where my daughter still believed I worked in beautiful places filled with beautiful people. Vincent walked back to the fireplace before sitting across from me. May I ask you something? I nodded. Why did you apologize? I looked down at the towel folded neatly across my lap. Because arguing would not have changed anything. Perhaps not, he replied. But it was never your fault. I smiled faintly. Sometimes being right costs more than I can afford. His gray eyes studied me with thoughtful curiosity. What do you mean? I took a slow breath before answering honestly. I am raising my 6-year-old daughter by myself. I have 2 housekeeping jobs during the week and catering work on weekends. Losing even one paycheck means choosing between groceries, rent, or school supplies. Pride does not keep the lights on. The room fell silent except for the gentle crackle of the fireplace. Vincent rested his elbows lightly on his knees. What is your daughter's name? Sophie. I smiled despite myself. She believes I spend my weekends serving princesses. A quiet laugh escaped him. Does she know you are the strongest person in every room you enter? I shook my head. She thinks I am just her mom. Then she already knows enough. His answer surprised me. It carried none of the polished compliments wealthy people often use to make themselves feel generous. It sounded genuine. After another quiet moment, he reached toward a small leather folder resting on the coffee table. I would like to offer you compensation for what happened tonight. I gently raised my hand before he could continue. Please do not. He paused. You have not even heard the offer. Because I already know my answer. He leaned back slightly, more interested than offended. Why? I met his eyes without hesitation. If I accept money because someone treated me badly, then they still control the story. I would rather leave with my dignity. For several seconds, Vincent said nothing at all. Then, very slowly, the smallest smile appeared. Not the confident smile of a powerful man accustomed to getting his way, but the quiet smile of someone who had just discovered something unexpectedly rare. "Miss Bennet," he said softly, "I have met people willing to sell almost anything. Tonight, I finally met someone who refuses to sell her self-respect." Before I could respond, one of the security men knocked gently on the open door. "Sir," he said respectfully, "your car is ready." Vincent nodded once before looking back at me. "Allow me to drive you home." I immediately shook my head. "That is kind, but I cannot." He did not argue. Instead, he stood, walked to the doorway, and gave one simple instruction. To his head of security, "Make certain Miss Bennet reaches home safely without drawing attention." Then he turned back toward me with the same calm expression he had carried since the moment we met. "Some people protect what belongs to them," he said quietly. "I prefer protecting what is right, and tonight those are not the same thing." The ride home that night passed quietly beneath streets washed in pale moonlight. I never saw the security vehicle Vincent had mentioned, but every traffic light seemed to turn green just as I approached it, and for the first time in months I arrived at my apartment without feeling completely alone. Sophie was already asleep on the couch with her favorite stuffed rabbit tucked beneath one arm and a coloring book spread across the coffee table. I smiled as I carefully carried her to bed, brushing a loose strand of hair away from her face before pulling the blanket over her shoulders. Moments like that reminded me why I endured long shifts, aching feet, and difficult people without complaint. The next morning began like every other weekday. I packed Sophie's lunch, walked her to school, and headed toward the downtown apartment building where I worked as a housekeeper during the day. I had almost convinced myself the previous evening belonged to another lifetime until my phone vibrated during lunch. Mrs. Harper's name appeared on the screen. "Clara," she said the moment I answered. "Someone from the Romano estate called asking whether you would be available tomorrow morning." I frowned in confusion. "For another catering event?" "No," she replied. "They requested you personally." I looked out the break room window toward the busy street below. "There must be some mistake." "I asked twice," she said with a quiet laugh. There was no mistake. The following morning, curiosity finally overcame hesitation. The address led me through tall wrought iron gates onto a winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees before revealing one of the largest private estates I had ever seen. The mansion looked elegant without feeling excessive. Fresh flowers surrounded the entrance. Gardeners carefully trimmed hedges while staff members moved through. The grounds with calm purpose rather than fear. A house manager named Eleanor welcomed me warmly. "Mr. Romano is expecting you," she said. Instead of leading me through formal reception rooms, she guided me toward a quieter wing of the house hidden behind a private courtyard. She unlocked a solid walnut door using a key card before stepping aside. "Only 3 people have access to this part of the estate," she explained. "Mr. Romano, myself, and the person responsible for his private residence." I looked around the peaceful living space. A library filled one wall from floor to ceiling. Fresh coffee rested on a breakfast table beside neatly organized medications, correspondence, and a leather appointment book. Everything appeared lived in rather than staged. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked softly. Before Eleanor could answer, Vincent entered from the adjoining study, carrying several files beneath one arm. Without the tuxedo from the gala, he wore a simple charcoal sweater with the sleeves pushed back, revealing more of the intricate tattoos winding across his forearms. He smiled politely. "Because I would like to offer you a position." I blinked in surprise. "As what?" He looked around the room before meeting my eyes again. "My private personal maid." I immediately shook my head. "Surely you already have someone." Eleanor smiled. "We did." Vincent finished the thought quietly. "She retired after 22 years. Since then I have trusted no one enough to replace her." The room fell silent. I could not understand why a man surrounded by wealth, influence, and countless employees would choose someone he had met only once. Vincent seemed to read the question on my face. "Last night, I did not see a woman who quietly endured humiliation," he said. "I saw someone who protected her dignity when it would have been easier to surrender it. That is the kind of person I trust inside my home." The offer stayed with me long after I left the estate. During the drive home, I kept replaying Vincent's words in my mind. wondering how someone could place so much trust in a person he barely knew. By the time I reached my apartment, Sophie was sitting at the kitchen table, coloring a picture of a little white cottage surrounded by flowers. She looked up the moment I walked through the door. "Mom, you are smiling," she said with delighted surprise. "Did something good happen today?" I laughed softly as I hung my coat near the door. "Maybe." She narrowed her eyes with playful seriousness. "That means yes." I sat beside her and kissed the top of her head before helping with homework and preparing dinner. That night, after Sophie had fallen asleep, I carefully reviewed the employment agreement Vincent's office had given me. The position offered steady hours, generous benefits, and enough stability that I would finally be able to spend evenings with my daughter instead of rushing between multiple jobs. Yet the salary mattered less than one sentence near the bottom of the page. Respect and privacy are expected in equal measure. For the first time in years, a job description spoke about trust before money. 2 days later, I accepted. Eleanor welcomed me warmly on my first official morning and patiently introduced me to the routines that kept the private residence running smoothly. Unlike the formal areas used for business meetings and receptions, Vincent's personal wing felt peaceful. Fresh flowers were changed every Monday. Books were returned to the same shelves every evening. Breakfast was always served at exactly 7:30, not because Vincent demanded perfection, but because he valued consistency. My responsibilities extended far beyond cleaning. I organized correspondence, coordinated appointments with Eleanor, prepared the library before evening reading hours, and quietly made certain everything inside the residence reflected calm rather than luxury. I quickly realized why Vincent had described the position differently from ordinary housekeeping. He was not searching for someone to polish furniture. He was searching for someone he could completely trust inside the one place where he allowed himself to simply be a man instead of a powerful name. One afternoon, I noticed a framed photograph resting alone on a bookshelf. It showed a much younger Vincent standing beside an elderly woman wearing a warm smile and a simple apron. Eleanor noticed me looking at it. "That was Mrs. Margaret," she said fondly. "She looked after this house for more than 2 decades. She must have been very special." Eleanor nodded. She reminded Mr. Romano that kindness belongs inside a home just as much as discipline. Later that day, Vincent returned earlier than expected from a meeting. As I prepared coffee in the kitchen, he quietly stepped inside. "How was your first week?" he asked. I smiled. "Peaceful." He leaned lightly against the doorway. That is exactly how Mrs. Margaret used to describe this house. I looked around the sunlit kitchen where fresh bread cooled on the counter and flowers brightened the windowsill. Then she must have taken wonderful care of it. Vincent studied the room before answering softly. "She did." His eyes then met mine. And for the first time since she retired, it finally feels that way again. I lowered my gaze, unexpectedly moved by the quiet sincerity in his voice. Outside the kitchen window, late afternoon sunlight settled across the gardens while birds drifted between blooming roses. In that simple moment, I understood something important. Vincent had never hired me because he needed another employee. He had invited me into the most private part of his life because he believed a home deserved someone who protected it with the same dignity they protected themselves. As the weeks passed, the quiet rhythm of the estate slowly became part of my life. Every morning began with opening the library curtains to let the first sunlight spill across polished hardwood floors. Fresh coffee waited on the breakfast table at precisely 7:30. The flowers in the sitting room were changed before the first meeting of the day, and every evening ended with the fireplace lit just before Vincent returned from work. It was never about luxury. It was about consistency, and I gradually understood that consistency had become the one place where he found peace. Sophie adjusted to the new routine faster than I expected. On the afternoons when school ended early, Eleanor would invite her to the estate library while I finished organizing correspondence or preparing the private dining room. The library quickly became Sophie's favorite place in the world. She curled up beside the tall windows with storybooks almost twice her size, occasionally looking up only to wave excitedly whenever Vincent walked past. At first he responded with a quiet smile. Then one afternoon he stopped completely. Sophie held up a drawing covered with bright crayons. "I made this for you," she said proudly. Vincent accepted the paper with both hands as though it were something priceless. The picture showed a large house surrounded by flowers, with 3 smiling figures standing in front of the door. One wore a dark suit. One wore a blue dress. The smallest stood between them holding both of their hands. Across the top, Sophie had carefully written, "Home is where kind people live." Vincent looked at the drawing for several long seconds before kneeling so he could meet her eyes. "May I keep this?" he asked gently. Sophie nodded enthusiastically. "You have to put it somewhere important." He smiled. "I already know exactly where." Later that afternoon, I found the drawing carefully framed on the bookshelf inside his private study beside the photograph of Mrs. Margaret. I could not hide my surprise. "Most people keep awards in that place," I said softly. Vincent looked at the picture before answering. "Awards remind me what I accomplished. This reminds me why it matters." His words stayed with me long after I returned to work. A few days later, a heavy rainstorm rolled across the city just as I finished preparing dinner. The electricity flickered briefly before returning, and thunder echoed through the gardens outside. Sophie, who had always disliked storms, quietly appeared in the kitchen doorway, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. Before I could say anything, Vincent noticed her worried expression. Without making a fuss, he lit several candles, carried a tray of hot chocolate into the library, and invited us to join him. We spent the next hour reading stories by candlelight while rain tapped softly against the windows. Sophie gradually relaxed until she leaned sleepily against my shoulder. When another clap of thunder echoed outside, Vincent calmly continued reading as though nothing had happened. His steady voice transformed the storm into little more than background music. By the time the rain stopped, Sophie had fallen asleep beside me. Vincent quietly draped a soft blanket over both of us before dimming the lights. Our eyes met across the warm glow of the fireplace, and neither of us spoke. The silence carried everything words could not. Before leaving the room, he gently rested his hand against my shoulder for only a moment, a simple gesture filled with care rather than expectation. In that peaceful library, surrounded by books, candlelight, and the quiet breathing of my sleeping daughter, I realized that the safest place either of us had ever found was not the mansion itself. It was the trust that had slowly grown inside it, one ordinary day at a time. By the time the first spring flowers appeared throughout the estate, the quiet routines we had built together no longer felt new. They felt permanent. Every morning, Sophie ran through the front garden searching for the first roses beginning to bloom, proudly reporting each new blossom to Eleanor before school. Every afternoon, the library filled with warm sunlight that spilled across the reading chairs where Vincent often spent an hour with a book after returning from meetings. I quietly prepared tea while Sophie curled up beside him reading her own stories, occasionally asking him to pronounce difficult words. He never hurried her. He listened to every sentence as though it mattered. One Saturday morning, Eleanor invited several longtime staff members and their families to the estate for a spring luncheon in the gardens. Gardeners, drivers, cooks, housekeepers, and office assistants spread picnic blankets beneath the flowering trees while children chased butterflies across the lawn. It was the first gathering of its kind anyone could remember. Mr. Romano never enjoyed large personal celebrations, Eleanor whispered to me while arranging fresh flowers on the tables. Until recently, I looked toward Vincent standing near the fountain as Sophie excitedly showed him a tiny ladybug resting on her finger. His smile appeared effortlessly now, no longer hidden behind the careful reserve he had carried when we first met. As lunch ended, several children gathered around asking Vincent to judge the little birdhouses they had painted during the morning craft activity. He examined every one with complete seriousness before announcing that every design deserved first place because each child had worked with kindness instead of competition. Laughter spread across the garden, and even the adults applauded. Watching him kneel in the grass beside the children, I realized how different he looked from the distant man I had first met overlooking the charity gala. His strength had never disappeared. It had simply found gentler ways to reveal itself. Later that afternoon, a familiar luxury sedan quietly entered the estate gates. Eleanor glanced toward the driveway before looking back at me. Some visitors requested a private meeting. I recognized the two women almost immediately. They stepped from the vehicle dressed with the same elegance I remembered from the gala, but the confidence they once carried had faded. Through the library window, I watched them speak quietly with Vincent in his study while I continued arranging fresh flowers nearby. Nearly half an hour later, the office door opened. Both women walked out with calm expressions, stopping when they reached me. The taller woman lowered her eyes before speaking. "Miss Bennett, I owe you an apology." Her voice sounded sincere rather than rehearsed. "Nothing excuses how we treated you." I remained silent for a brief moment before answering gently. "I hope you never treat anyone else that way." She nodded slowly. "Neither do I." They thanked Eleanor before quietly leaving the estate. Afterward, I found Vincent standing alone in the garden, watching the evening sun settle beyond the trees. "You did not embarrass them," I said softly. He shook his head. "Humiliation rarely teaches people anything lasting." I looked at him with quiet admiration. "Then why did they apologize?" He smiled faintly. "Because once they understood the truth, they had to face the people they had become." The answer stayed with me long after the conversation ended. That evening, as Sophie skipped happily through the gardens, collecting fallen flower petals for another art project, I realized justice had arrived exactly as Vincent believed it should. Not through revenge, not through anger, but through truth, dignity, and the quiet courage to let character speak louder than pride. Summer arrived quietly, filling the estate with the scent of blooming roses and freshly cut grass carried through open windows each morning. The grand mansion no longer felt like an enormous private residence guarded by routine and silence. It felt lived in. Sophie's laughter drifted through the hallways almost every afternoon after school. Eleanor hummed softly while arranging fresh flowers in the entrance hall, and the library windows remained open just enough to let warm sunlight spill across the shelves where Vincent often ended his day. One Monday morning, I was arranging fresh white lilies in the dining room when Vincent walked in carrying a folder instead of his usual stack of business documents. "Would you have lunch with me today?" he asked calmly. I looked up in surprise. "During work?" A faint smile crossed his face. "I believe you have earned one uninterrupted lunch break." We drove only a few miles to the DeLuca Foundation Community Center, a place that had quietly expanded over the past several months. New classrooms filled one wing of the building. A larger kitchen served hot meals to dozens of families each day. Children ran through the courtyard carrying backpacks filled with school supplies, while volunteers greeted everyone by name. As soon as Sophie saw us arrive after summer camp, she rushed toward Vincent with a handmade paper crown decorated in bright markers. "You have to wear it," she insisted. He looked at the crown with complete seriousness before placing it carefully on his head. The children burst into laughter and applause. Watching one of the most respected men in the city happily wear a paper crown because a little girl asked him to reminded me once again that true strength had nothing to do with appearances. After lunch, the foundation hosted a small ceremony celebrating volunteers who had quietly served the community throughout the year. I expected to remain in the audience, helping distribute refreshments, but the director unexpectedly called my name. "This year's Community Heart Recognition goes to someone who reminds all of us that dignity begins with ordinary kindness." Confused, I slowly walked toward the stage. The applause grew louder as I reached the podium. I looked at Vincent, expecting him to be as surprised as I was, but he simply smiled with quiet encouragement. The director handed me a framed certificate before explaining that dozens of families had written letters describing how welcome they felt because of simple conversations, warm smiles, and patient encouragement I had offered during difficult moments. I could barely find the words to respond. "I only tried to treat people the way I hoped someone would treat my daughter," I said softly. The room fell silent before gentle applause filled every corner of the hall once again. When the ceremony ended and everyone returned to their conversations, Vincent joined me beneath a large oak tree in the courtyard. "Congratulations," he said. I shook my head with a shy smile. "You built all of this." He looked toward the families laughing together across the lawn. "Buildings can be constructed with money," he replied. "Communities are built by people who make strangers feel like they belong." His words settled gently into my heart. As we walked back toward the estate later that afternoon, Sophie skipped several steps ahead, collecting wildflowers from the edge of the path, before turning to wait for us every few yards. Without thinking, Vincent reached for my hand. This time neither of us hesitated. Our fingers intertwined naturally as though they had always belonged together. Looking at the peaceful road stretching home before us, I realized I was no longer simply caring for Vincent's house. Together, we had quietly built something far more valuable than any mansion could ever become. 1 year later, the same charity gala returned to the same magnificent estate, beneath the same crystal chandeliers, and beside the same shimmering pool where everything had quietly begun. The marble walkways still reflected golden lights across the water. Musicians still filled the evening air. With gentle melodies, and elegantly dressed guests once again gathered to celebrate generosity. Yet the atmosphere felt completely different to me. I no longer walked through the entrance carrying a silver tray or wondering whether anyone would notice I existed. Sophie skipped happily beside me, wearing a pale blue dress she had chosen herself, proudly holding my hand as though she had been preparing for this evening her entire life. "Mom," she whispered with an excited smile. "This is the place where everything changed, right?" I looked toward the calm water glowing beneath the lights and nodded softly. "Yes, sweetheart, it is." Moments later, a familiar black sedan arrived at the front entrance. Vincent stepped out wearing a perfectly tailored tuxedo, the familiar tattoos barely visible beneath the crisp white cuffs of his jacket. He walked toward us with the same calm confidence I had come to know so well, but the smile he gave Sophie and me belonged only to us. Without saying a word, he offered me his hand. I accepted it naturally, realizing that somewhere between quiet breakfasts, rainy evenings in the library, community projects, and countless ordinary days, we had stopped walking separate paths. As we entered the ballroom together, conversations softened around us. Some guests recognized me immediately from the previous year's gala. Instead of curious whispers, I noticed warm smiles and respectful greetings. Across the courtyard, near the same pool where I had once stood alone, the two women from that painful evening quietly approached. Their expressions carried none of the arrogance I remembered. "Miss Bennet," the taller woman said gently, "we are truly glad to see you again." I smiled politely. "Thank you. I hope you are doing well." There was no bitterness left between us. Time, reflection, and sincere change had accomplished what anger never could. Throughout the evening, the DeLuca Foundation announced new scholarship programs, expanded childcare services, and additional support for working single parents. When the host invited me to speak briefly about volunteering, I walked onto the stage with steady hands. Looking across the room, I saw Eleanor. Smiling proudly near the front row, staff members from the estate applauding warmly, community volunteers waving from the back of the ballroom, and Sophie standing beside Vincent with unmistakable pride shining in her eyes. A year ago, I began quietly. I believed dignity could be taken away by people with louder voices. I learned something very different. Dignity stays with us whenever we choose kindness over bitterness and hope over humiliation. The room remained completely silent. Sometimes the greatest gift another person can offer is not rescue. It is believing in you before you remember how to believe in yourself. Gentle applause gradually filled the ballroom. When the evening finally came to an end, Vincent and I stepped outside onto the quiet terrace overlooking the peaceful pool. The water reflected the stars so perfectly that it looked like another sky beneath our feet. He turned toward me, gently taking both of my hands in his. "Everyone thought I protected you because you worked for me," he said softly. "The truth is, this house only became a home because you stayed." Emotion caught gently in my throat. I stepped closer and placed a tender kiss upon his cheek before he leaned forward and returned a gentle kiss that carried every promise we had already been living one ordinary day at a time. Sophie ran onto the terrace laughing, slipping one hand into mine and the other into Vincent's. Together we looked across the quiet water where my worst memory had slowly become my most beautiful beginning, and I finally understood that the strongest homes are never built from wealth or walls. They are built from trust, kindness, and the people who choose to stay when walking away would have been easier.